I remember this season in our lives, when we're going through a lot, and I just gained weight. I just had a baby. God had told us to move from Joburg to come to Limpopo for ministry. It was just a crazy move, and we had just had a baby, right? And I remember I was so big, I didn't have clothes to wear, and I just remember writing a list for my father, um, of clothes that I need. I wrote, I need a leather jacket, I need white sneakers, I need to start over my new look and everything. And we had nothing. I wrote the list. I believe it was on the 14th of 13th, somewhere 13th February. I'll try to share the testimony as well. I'll show you my diary. I still have the diary, and I wrote that. And I think on the 14th, we didn't even have money for ice cream. We didn't even have anything because we just made this crazy move for God. And someone sent cash and said, God says that's money for clothes. That's your money for clothes. And I had even written the specific amount, you know. And you can try and do this. You can write the list and do that, but it might not work for you if you don't have the revelation. You need to study the scriptures where you see God fathering people. Scriptures like Luke chapter 10, the parable of the lost son. You need to see how God fathers. You need to see God as a father. God is such a father. I remember when I was in a terrible relationship with someone who was not born again. This guy said he saw he saw my father come to him in a dream saying, "Get your hands off my daughter." And I was like, oh, even though I was wrong, but I felt like, oh, God is such a dad. Like, I have this personal revelation that God is my dad, God is my father. And there are certain things that there are certain testimonies that you will listen to, but until you get it for yourself, you get the revelation that God is my father, you won't receive such things. That's God reveals himself. You experience God based on what you believe and know about him, especially from the scriptures. And then the last dimension, which people miss a lot, is God the judge, right? According to Luke chapter 18, when Jesus teaches about prayer, he says this is, Jesus taught this parable so that to teach people that men ought to pray and not give up. And he was teaching this parable in the context of spiritual warfare, because this poor widow is coming to an unjust judge and saying, grant me justice against my adversary. So we are seeing, court legalistic language, court language, and this is where, we're teaching about the courts of heaven. This is where we are teaching about the blood of Jesus. So you need to understand